Hey guys, our friend Marshall Kosloff, he's going to be conducting interviews with experts and newsmakers for us here on the Breaking Points channel. We're really excited.
Yep, here it is.
Hey, Breaking Points, Marshall here, Saagar's co-host of The Realignment, also doing weekly interviews for Breaking Points, where we go a little deeper into a topic that's in the news. If there's any topics that are of interest to you, be sure to hit me up on Twitter, and I'll be sure to cover them in the weeks going forward. Today, we're obviously going to talk about Elon Musk, Twitter, all those bits. So that's why I'm really pumped that we're joined by a friend of both The Realignment and Breaking Points, Alex Kentrovitz. Alex is the writer of the Big Technology Substack and the host of the Big Technology podcast. His work really is about looking inside tech companies and seeing what's actually happening, which makes you perfectly suited to tell us what the hell is going on with Twitter this week.
Oh, man. Well, it's been one of the crazier weeks in Twitter history. And I think for a time we thought that we were done with most of the nuttiness with Twitter, but clearly we haven't gotten started. It's about to get much crazier, and this beat is about as fun as it could possibly be.
Man, I just want to say firstly, What do you mean by nuttier? It seems like, so what are like the other previous examples of how crazy Twitter's been, and why did people think that with Jack Dorsey leaving, things were going to chill down? Then we'll get into Elon, of course.
Yes, of course. So yeah, this week's big news is that Elon's joined the board, but I mean, in the past, there's been like two really absurd eras of Twitter history. And by the way, Twitter's lived in an absurd era since it was started. So this is we kind of thought we might be getting out of it. The first absurd era is the infighting among Twitter's founders and inside the organizational dysfunction inside the company that has been so difficult for Twitter to get through and actually get anything done. You talk about having Jack Dorsey in as multiple times as CEO. You talk about the fact that the company had a product every year for like 5 straight years, never built anything because they couldn't get their ducks in a line. The place has been about as dysfunctional as any company that exists. And then like Jack Dorsey came in as CEO in 2015 after Dick Costolo left. And he said, listen, we're going to actually ship products now. We're going to like rethink the fundamentals of the product. He introduced an algorithm. He made tweets longer. He created a centralized place, first called Moments, now called Discover, inside the app to find out what's going on. And he really solidified the company's identity as a news platform, more than like a catch-all, platform for celebrity stuff and sports stuff. No, he said, we're all about news. We're all about what's happening today. And it seemed like finally Twitter was on its way to some, normalcy and direction under Jack. And then Donald Trump enters the 2016 election primary, for the Republicans. And listen, whether you like Donald Trump or you don't like Donald Trump, he turned Twitter into a madhouse, both the platform itself and the, inside the company. The company had no idea what to do with him. He was making these extremely consequential tweets challenging, almost challenging the Kim Jong-un from North Korea to a nuclear rocket match, calling him Little Rocket Man. And there seemed to be, and that was just like a normal, one of the normal weeks while Trump was president. We never had a world leader use the platform in the way Trump did. And so, no, there was no saying that Twitter was going to be a normal place while he was president. Okay, he loses the election to Joe Biden. January 6th happens. Twitter decides after the inauguration or a few days after that to suspend Trump permanently, which is important. I'm sure we're going to get back to this at a certain point. And by and large, the platform exits the Trump era, and it soon exits the Jack era. And Joe Biden's tweets are pretty benign to the point of being completely non-noticeable.
I cannot think of a single Joe Biden tweet, but to your point, I could think of 10 Trump tweets, and the audience can too right now.
Exactly. So you would think that whether you like the decision that Twitter made to suspend Trump permanently or not, the company was not a turbulent company. It became something of a boring company when it came to the drama surrounding it. That was until this week when Elon Musk first bought enough shares to get him 9.2% of ownership inside the company, and then joined the board Tuesday morning. And we are now firmly in the Elon era of Twitter history. And Elon isn't just going to sit there and be quiet. He's promised that there's going to be significant change coming to the company, during his era. And I wouldn't doubt that promise for a second.
Yeah, it's funny. We had to give that history that you just described there because it really is important that people understand that Elon is jumping into a very volatile news personality situation. But here's the bit that I think is also interesting, and it speaks to the challenges that Elon's going to have there. Despite how relevant Twitter has been, traditionally, the company hasn't actually performed that well relative to other companies. So, for example, people will say Facebook, Twitter, Google, as if these are all companies in the same category, but Twitter is much, much, much lower. It's not exactly putting the big in big tech. So can you talk about the business side of Twitter and how Elon's actually going to interact with that side? Then we'll get into the speech stuff.
Oh, well, I think the two are totally intertwined. So I might just jump right in if you don't mind.
Yeah, please do it.
So Twitter has always struggled to generate the type of advertising revenue that a company like Facebook or a company like Google might. And you're saying, well, why is that? They have hundreds of millions of people on the service, or 100+ million people on the service every day, using it with like a fair addiction, like someone like an Elon has, for instance. The biggest reason advertisers have stayed away from Twitter is because the platform doesn't really lend itself to contextual ads that make sense. So for instance, if you have two people in the middle of a flame war that just gets worse and worse and worse, and I'm giving a benign example of something that exists on Twitter, you don't want to be Tide or, Jack Daniels showing up in the middle of a fight where someone's calling the other person's mother terrible names. It's just not a good place for an advertiser to show up. They'd much rather show up on, Facebook or like a network television show where they know that the content's been vetted. Twitter is an angry place powered by outrage. And it has long been a really tough sell inside the offices in Madison Avenue, where the big advertising deals get done, in order to advertise on Twitter. Now, that being said, it's somewhat of a miracle that Twitter still brought in $5 billion in advertising revenue last year. And there's an argument to be made that that's largely because the company has moderated its content to the point that advertisers now feel that their ad for Tide isn't going to show up in the middle of like a, white nationalist support rally. And of course, they've gone way overboard, but this has been because of financial reasons that, and they don't want to, get anywhere close to some of these quote unquote brand safety issues. So I'll just wrap it up here and let you ask the next question. But, if Elon's going to come in and he's going to have significant influence over the company, there's no doubt about it. If he's going to come in and say, we actually want to moderate less, it's going to be interesting because it's almost going to put his ideological interests at odds with the interests of the company's business and some of the company's employees. And so let's say Elon, because he has come out and said that he wants less, more free speech on Twitter. So it's one of the weirdest cases of an investment ever, where you could end up seeing Elon, accomplish his goals, harm the business, and potentially rankle the employees, but also be seen by many as someone who restored Twitter to what it used to be, where the company wanted to be, and in the words of its executives, the free speech wing of the free speech party. And you start putting that all in your head and it starts to explode because it doesn't make sense in in any normal business analysis. But again, we're dealing with Elon Musk here, and it's not going to make sense as it would in the normal business analysis.
Yeah, and you're not a lawyer, so I'm not expecting a perfect answer to this, but aren't there implications when it comes to shareholder value and those ideas? Let's say if Elon's decisions don't actually lead to the company performing better, are there any implications for how that plays out legally, or any bits like that? Because I want to make this very clear for the audience. What you are saying is old Twitter, free speech, libertarian Twitter was not that great of a business space. Once again, people have to understand there's a difference between public square, relevant Twitter, and let's say hyper profitable Twitter. There's not quite the perfect lineup between those two things.
So yeah, you're right. Traditionally, CEOs are leaders of public companies, and I would even put right now Elon as like one of the leaders of Twitter. It's clear. So let me just say how important Elon is to the company already. Jack Dorsey tweeted that he said, "I'm really happy Elon is joining the Twitter board. He cares deeply about our world and Twitter's role in it. Parag, who's the current CEO, and Elon both lead with their hearts, and they will be an incredible team. I have never, ever seen anyone who joins the board being put on equal footing with the CEO and be referenced as a teammate, as opposed to someone who will give guidance, as in the way that Jack, who's also on the board, put Elon into context." So I think Elon will have a tremendous amount of influence, on the company's direction. Now, ultimately, it's up to the CEO, Parag, to be able to maximize shareholder value, which is sort of the core of the question that you asked, right? And so what happens if Elon influences their speech policies and now they're making less money? Can he get in trouble with the SEC or something like that? I think that it's possible, but I think it's highly unlikely. I think that Elon has shown that he can taunt the SEC to his heart's delight, saying that it stands for, and this is in his words, what does he say? Blank Elon's blank. That's what SEC stands for, and get away with it. And he's had some penalties, but nothing meaningful, really, in the grand scheme of things. And so ultimately, I don't think there's going to be an issue there, like in terms of legal problems there. And the corollary to that is, and I think Elon could make a fair argument to say that public company values today are detached from the revenue that they bring in and the earnings report that they deliver. And all you have to do is look at a GameStop and look at an AMC and understand that their stock prices were totally tied to the vibes of the moment. And no one brings better vibes when it comes to his support and his influence and his money than Elon Musk, if you're a public company. And so he could say, listen, shut up about the damage that you say I'm causing to the revenue. This stock is to the moon and it's completely my doing. So if you got a problem with that SEC, I think you should focus on looking at bigger problems. That's a potentially legitimate argument that Elon could make.
When you said to the moon, I thought of the Peter Griffin Family Guy sketch. He said it, and you said it. So I'm glad we could get that in. So, okay, so let's really sum up here. What are the actual, let's say, changes or beefs that Elon has with what's happening at Twitter right now? Because you could say he's dissatisfied with the general vibe of the company going into last week. That's what drives this decision. But does he think that Donald Trump should be back on the platform? Does he think that the company isn't shipping products fast enough? Does he think that Twitter shouldn't be, to your point, a news platform as opposed to something different? Like, what are the specific tangible things that he either has solutions to already or has indicated he specifically wants to change?
Well, yeah, look, there's a couple of things that he's already kind of hinted at, minor things. Someone talked to him about crypto spam bots that appear under every tweet. And he said that's one of the most annoying things about Twitter. So I expect the development team
Can you explain what those are for the less online listeners?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Sorry. Sometimes I have to bring it back to the real world.
Yeah.
So look, when you're on Twitter, if you look at a high profile person's tweets, if you look under the replies, there will generally be a bunch of bots that will try to get you to buy some shit coin and say, okay, like, you can, if you give us this money, we'll give you that amount of money and you better do it now, get in quick. These appear in like every tweet. Or like if you tweet about Bitcoin in general, there will be like 9 bots who will just be like, Bitcoin, blah, blah, blah. Here's some, wallet that you should transfer money to. And it is extremely annoying part about Twitter. So Elon pointed that out as something that's annoying. And so I imagine that the Twitter development team is already working on a solution to that. He also has kind of taken a flick at the bringing in an edit button and seemed to be going back and forth in the comments about how it could be done. So maybe we start to see editing take place on Twitter. There's probably lots of different product ideas that he has. I mean, he might be in the top 1% of people in terms of use on the product. The dude uses Twitter like a maniac. Both in terms of what he tweets and in terms of how often he's on it, which is amazing for a guy running 2 companies at the moment, or 3, if you count Boring Company. And so, I think that he probably has some product ideas. And I really think that there's a good chance that he does get into these speech things. Now, whether he can do that as a someone on the board is a question mark, but he has indicated in the past that he doesn't think Twitter is doing a good job being a forum for free speech, given that it's serving as the de facto town square. So could he push the company to be more lenient, or at least to rationalize some of the speech rules? That's possible. And then, the Donald Trump question is so interesting. Here's my perspective on it. And we just talked about it on Big Technology Podcast, the one that's actually going up this week. But can Donald Trump, can Elon Musk have any credibility if he's coming in talking about how Twitter is pulling back speech, the ability to speak? Can he have any credibility if within 6 months Donald Trump is not back on the platform? He'll be looked at as either powerless or someone who's empty with his words. Again, like I'm not gonna stand here and say I'm a fan of what Donald Trump did on January 6th. I am not. And I do think there should have been recourse, for that. And I think that Twitter might have had, probably had a good rationale to kick him off the platform after that. Although then there are arguments, well, why can the Taliban be on Twitter, or why can the Russian foreign ministry? And I think those are legitimate arguments to discuss. But ultimately, the guy was the president of the United States. He's banned off of Twitter, and so. If you're a trailblazing guy coming in, investing billions of dollars and talking about how Twitter is not a forum for free speech, and under your tandem leadership with the CEO, Donald Trump remains suspended, then what were you actually talking about? Because it wasn't free speech, it was forms of speech, and we can have a discussion about that, but you can't hide behind this label of being a free speech crusader if Donald Trump remains suspended, and that will bring him at odds with the Twitter employee base in a real way. And that could be another interesting battle to watch.
So to sum up, then, it seems as if the metric we should be looking at, it's not particularly going to be the number of products they're shipping, because that's already improved, right? Like, who would have thought 3 years ago that Twitter Spaces would get turned up so quickly to compete and frankly defeat Clubhouse? So that speaks to something. It would really be how are they going to deal, or how will Elon deal with this very symbolic but also deeply important example? So here's the last question I'll wrap with. It speaks to your bigger work at Big Technology. So you've spent years just in the industry looking at these companies. You actually even wrote a book about this. And here's the question. The book's called Always Day One, obviously. How much do individuals, even big shareholders such as Elon Musk, CEOs, ultimately matter in the face of these massive companies? So to your point earlier, we started the podcast by pointing out there's been a big personality re-interjecting itself into Twitter consistently every few years. So we're keeping up tradition here, if anything. How much do you think this has tended to matter in the tech industry as a whole?
Oh, I think with someone with like Elon, it can matter a lot. And let me give a little bit of evidence to the point. So you mentioned right before that Twitter shipped Spaces, and seemingly, which is its Clubhouse copycat, although who knows what Clubhouse is anymore, right? It's now become Spaces. Spaces is what Clubhouse used to be. And they shipped it at lightning speed. Why did that happen so quickly? From my understanding, in 2020, an activist investor named Elliott Management bought a 4% stake in Twitter and said it wanted better product development, and put all these specifications. Otherwise, Jack had to leave the company. And Elon bought more than double that percent of the company. And he has promised significant changes are going to come to the company just on Tuesday. So given that context, I think Elon can make a big difference. Now, is it going to be necessarily they'll build the products that Elon wants them to build? There might be some of that. Is it going to be that they'll enforce the speech, content moderation policies that Elon wants? That's going to be tougher, but there might be some of that. Is it going to be that the product teams there know that Elon Musk, the guy who built, the world's, most popular electric car, when it comes to brand, ships that go to outer space, right, and can land on reentry, that this is the guy who is the largest independent shareholder in the company, and he wants them shipping? You think that's going to light a fire under their butts? Absolutely, it will. And so we'll see what happens now. And I'll note that a company like Twitter does serve an important function. I wouldn't mess with it too much. But we're about to see a series of changes come to the company, maybe unlike we've seen before. And we already recently thought we were shipping fast. And it just makes the world of following and covering this company, so interesting as it's been from the outset. The first week I was on the beat, there was a CEO change, and it hasn't really slowed down since then. And so here we go. It's going to be a fascinating new era under Elon Musk. And, the one thing that I can promise is that it will not be boring.
Well, I can guarantee you we will have you on at some point in the next 2 or 3 years to have this exact same conversation all over again. Alex, we'd love for you to shout out where folks should take a look at your work if they're interested in learning more.
Awesome. Thanks, Marshall. So you can find Big Technology Podcast on your podcast app of choice. Just type in Big Technology Podcast. We have a long discussion with Chris Mims from the Wall Street Journal about Elon's entry into Twitter as an investor and the board. You won't want to miss it. And then my newsletter is called Big Technology. It's on Substack.
And deeply aware of Breaking Points listeners will remember Chris Mims came on last week to do this version on supply chain. So the world is incredibly small, as always. Alex, thank you for joining us on Breaking Points.
Thanks for having me, Marshall.
Cable news is ripping us apart, dividing the country, making it impossible to function as a society, and making it impossible to know just what is true and what is false. But the good news is they are failing and they know it.
That is why we're building something new, a new mainstream, a healthier one, something more trustworthy, something that we are going to need in one of the most pivotal times in American history. We are building up here for the midterms, for the upcoming presidential election, but we need your help. So if you can help us out by becoming a premium member today at breakingpoints.com, we're trying to change America for the better and the entire world.
So what are you waiting for, guys? Go to breakingpoints.com and sign up and help us build a new mainstream.